Elliot Norris always considered himself a man who noticed details. That was the secret to his success as a financial analyst, seeing what others missed. Minor market fluctuations, subtle trends, tiny discrepancies in company reports. But he never thought that one day his attention to detail would turn his own home into a crime scene. It all started with a smell, an unfamiliar, almost imperceptible scent in their bedroom. It wasn't Wandy's perfume. He could recognize her favorite Joe Malone with his eyes closed. It was something else, something masculine. Cologne, perhaps? Elliot didn't think much of it at the time. Odors can come from anywhere. Maybe one of the delivery guys who brought Wendy's groceries. The second clue was a shirt with a missing button. Wendy always kept his wardrobe in almost manic order, and she had missed such an obvious detail. When he pointed it out, she looked confused for a split second before smiling and promising to sew the button back on. "I'm sorry, dear. I've been so busy with the charity foundation lately. My head is spinning." Elliot nodded. Wendy did have an active social life, especially since he had insisted that she quit her job as an administrator. After all, with his income, she didn't need to work for money. Better to channel her energy into something more enjoyable. And Wendy seemed to have blossomed in her role as a socialite, organizing charity events and parties. But then there were the phone calls. Phone conversations that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Text messages she hastily deleted. Sudden meetings with friends he had never heard of before. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Elliot himself understood that 52 was not the easiest age, especially when your wife is only 31. At times he was overcome by an insecurity he had never known in his professional life. What did Wendy see in him besides financial stability and social status? What had kept her with him for all these 5 years? They met at the Equinox Fitness Club on Wall Street, where Elliot was trying to compensate for his 30-hour workdays and perpetual lack of exercise. Wendy worked there as an administrator, greeting tired financiers with a dazzling smile. Elliot remembered the first time he saw her, a slender blonde with her hair pulled back in a high ponytail, wearing the club's signature black uniform. She called the regulars by name, remembered their preferences, and always found the right words to say. It took him 3 months to work up the courage to ask her out for coffee. "I'm afraid that's against company policy," she replied. But there was regret in her eyes that gave him hope. "What if I'm no longer a member of the club?" Elliot asked, surprising himself. She laughed, and that laugh changed something inside him. It was sincere, open, full of life, everything that was missing from his existence. "Are you willing to give up the best fitness club in Manhattan for a cup of coffee with me?" "For the chance to have a cup of coffee with you," he clarified. The next day, Elliot canceled his membership at Equinox and signed up for a less prestigious club 2 blocks away. A week later, he and Wendy were drinking not just coffee, but champagne at a restaurant overlooking Central Park. She was originally from a small town in Ohio and had come to New York with dreams of a career in the fashion industry, but the reality of the big city quickly changed those plans. Her job as an administrator was just a way to pay for the tiny apartment she shared with 2 roommates in Brooklyn. Wendy listened to his stories about the financial markets with genuine interest. She laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. She asked questions about his life as if she really wanted to know the answers. And something about her made him feel younger, more energetic, more alive. 4 months later, he proposed. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony attended by close friends, most of whom were his colleagues. Wendy's parents were unable to attend. Her father was confined to a wheelchair after a stroke, and her mother couldn't bear to leave him alone. "I realize this is all happening very fast," Elliot said on the eve of their wedding, as they sat on the terrace of his penthouse, now their shared home. "If you want to wait, why wait when you know it's right?" she replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "Life is too short for doubts." The first years of their marriage seemed cloudless. Wendy brought a brightness and spontaneity to his measured existence that he had been sorely lacking. She completely transformed his apartment, turning a sterile bachelor pad into a cozy home. She introduced him to the art of modern cuisine, replacing his standard diet of office lunches and convenience foods. She taught him to find pleasure in simple things: walks around the city, picnics in the park, spontaneous weekend trips. He, in turn, opened up a world she had only dreamed of: trendy restaurants, exclusive parties, first-class travel. Wendy proved to be a surprisingly quick learner, quickly mastering the unspoken rules of Manhattan's high society. His colleagues, initially skeptical of the marriage, were soon charmed by her naturalness and genuine interest in their lives. On their third wedding anniversary, Elliot gave her membership in the Metropolitan Museum's Charity Committee, a privilege usually reserved for the wives of the city's most influential men. Wendy burst into tears when he handed her the beautiful folder containing the invitation. "You have no idea what this means to me," she whispered, kissing him. And it was true. He didn't fully understand how important this symbolic gesture of acceptance into the society she so longed to belong to was to her. From that moment on, Wendy's social life became even more intense. Committees, councils, charity events. She threw herself into these activities, finding her true calling. Elliot was proud of how easily she had blended into circles known for their exclusivity and snobbery. But gradually something began to change. At first, imperceptibly, then more and more obviously. Wendy began to spend more time away from home. Her explanations became increasingly vague. The committee meeting ran late. I had to stay to finalize the details of the event. Martha invited me to an impromptu dinner. The usual kisses when they met became more formal, almost mechanical. Elliot tried to convince himself that he was just exaggerating, that it was normal to have separate interests and activities, that marriage evolves, and what was there at the beginning inevitably changes over time. But then he found a business card in the pocket of her coat when he took it to the dry cleaners. James Foster, architect, and a phone number written by hand on the back. Elliot didn't ask her about it. Instead, he started collecting clues. Strange charges on the credit card he had taken out in her name, restaurant reservations on days when she was supposedly at charity events, discrepancies in her schedule, which he carefully checked against the official calendars of the organizations she worked for. All these little things, insignificant in themselves, added up to a picture he didn't want to see. A picture in which the woman who had been the center of his life for the past 5 years was probably leading a double life. Elliot Norris was not a man of impulsive decisions. Years of work had taught him that the most costly mistakes are made in moments of emotional turmoil. So he proceeded methodically, gathering information, analyzing facts, and constructing hypotheses. Only when the folder with evidence became thick enough did he decide to turn to a professional. The name Lawrence Kane was recommended to him by a colleague who had gone through a painful divorce a few years ago. "If you have suspicions, this guy will find the truth. Just be prepared. The truth may not be what you hope for." Elliot stared at the private investigator's business card for a long time before dialing the number. It was a standard white rectangle with a minimalist design. Lawrence Kane, Private Investigations, confidentiality guaranteed. Nothing extraordinary. But that call could change his whole life. Perhaps, deep down, he still hoped for some rational explanation. Maybe Wandy really was busy organizing a surprise for their upcoming anniversary. Maybe all these oddities had a simple and innocent explanation. But when Wendy announced that she was going to Boston for 2 days to attend a fundraiser for a children's hospital, a conference he couldn't confirm existed, Elliot knew it was time to find out the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. He dialed the detective's number and made an appointment for the next day. And then he sat in their living room, watching Wendy pack her suitcase, carefully arranging items that he knew would never appear at a charity event. Silk lingerie bought at a boutique on Madison Avenue, a semi-sheer black dress she had never worn in front of him, a bottle of perfume different from the ones on her dressing table. "You look tired," Wendy said, noticing his gaze. "You should get more rest. Maybe go to a spa while I'm gone? I can arrange it." "I think I'll be busy," Elliot replied, surprised at how calm his voice sounded. She smiled, the same smile that had once turned his world upside down, and in that moment he almost hated her for still being able to affect him that way. "Okay, see you Sunday night. I love you." Elliot nodded, not trusting his voice. When the door closed behind her, he was left alone in the penthouse that had once seemed like the perfect home but had now become a museum of their crumbling marriage, filled with trinkets, the very details he had always noticed so well, pointing to the inevitable end. Lawrence Kane's office was located in an unremarkable building on the edge of Tribeca, far from the skyscrapers of the financial district where Elliot lived. A small metal plaque on the door was the only indication that this was a private detective agency. No sign, no advertising, just the office number and the initials LK in small print. Kane himself was the complete opposite of the stereotypical private detective from noir films. No crumpled raincoat, no cigarette in the corner of his mouth, no hoarse voice. He was a neatly dressed man of about 45, with thin-rimmed glasses and a military bearing. Elliot later learns that Kane is a former Marine who served in intelligence. "Mr. Norris," the detective shook his hand. "Have a seat. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you." Kane nodded and sat down opposite him, folding his hands on the table. "I think we should get right to the point. Your suspicions were correct. Your wife is indeed seeing another man." Elliot felt something tighten in his chest. It was one thing to suspect, but quite another to hear confirmation from a stranger. "His name is Nolan Pierce," Kane continued, opening a folder of photos. 32 years old musician. Returned to New York about 6 months ago after unsuccessful attempts to make a career in Los Angeles. Elliot took the first photo. It showed Wendy getting out of a taxi in front of an unremarkable apartment building in Brooklyn. In the second, she was already entering the building, carrying a small bag. In the third, she was kissing a tall, dark-haired man on the doorstep of the apartment. "They didn't meet recently," Kane added, seeing how closely Elliot was studying the photos. "According to the information I've gathered, they dated in high school when your wife lived in Ohio. First love, as they say." Elliot looked at the photos with a detached curiosity, as if he were examining evidence in one of his client's cases, not that of his own wife. "How long has this been going on?" "It's hard to say for sure, but at least 4 months, maybe longer. They're very careful. They meet irregularly in different places, but the main place is this apartment in Brooklyn." "Have you talked to him?" Kane shook his head. "We don't usually have direct contact with our subjects, but I've gathered information from other sources. Pierce works as a bartender at a jazz club in West Village. He also performs there with his band a couple of times a month. He plays guitar and sings. Nothing remarkable, just a typical failed musician with big ambitions." Elliot nodded, flipping through the photos. In one of them, Wendy and Nolan were sitting in a cafe, holding hands across the table. She was looking at him with an expression that Elliot had once thought was meant only for him. "Is that enough for a divorce?" he asked, gathering the photos back into a stack. "More than enough. But—" Kane hesitated for a second. "There's something else. Something that goes beyond ordinary marital infidelity." The detective took a small voice recorder out of his desk drawer and turned it on. At first, Elliot heard noise, the sounds of the street, muffled voices of passers-by. Then Wendy's voice, so familiar and yet completely foreign. "Are you sure everything will work? I can't afford to make a mistake, Nolan. This is our only chance." A man's voice, low and hoarse. Everything's been planned down to the last detail, baby. You arrive at the wedding wearing the family jewels, as planned. Me and the guys will sneak into the hotel through the back entrance. I've already made arrangements with one of the kitchen staff. During the reception, we'll cause a little commotion and kidnap you along with the jewels. No one will get hurt. It's just a little show. What if someone tries to protect me? There will be security. We've thought of everything. We'll have pepper spray and a couple of toy guns, enough to scare them but not hurt them. Besides, it will all happen so fast that no one will have time to react. And then we disappear. You'll be accidentally released in a couple of days and tell the police that you were held in some abandoned warehouse, but you managed to escape when the guard fell asleep. The jewelry, of course, will be gone forever. Your husband will get the insurance money, and we'll get our freedom and about $5 million. More than enough to start a new life somewhere on the coast of Mexico. Wendy's laughter is light and carefree. Sounds like an adventure from a movie. It will be, baby. Only with a happy ending for us, not for that old man. How old is he, by the way? 50? 55? 52, and he's not that bad, just boring as hell. His whole life is work, money, status. No passion, no fire. Not like you. Laughter again, but this time masculine. Well, I've got plenty of fire, and soon there'll be even more. 5 million fiery reasons to start all over again. The recording ended. Silence fell in the room, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. When was this recorded? Elliot asked, surprised at how calm his voice sounded. 3 days ago, in a cafe near the club where Pierce works. They weren't being very careful, thinking no one was listening. The wedding they're talking about. It's my sister's daughter's wedding. It's in 2 weeks at the Plaza Hotel. The family jewels are a sapphire and diamond necklace that belonged to my grandmother. It's worth about $5 million. Wendy was supposed to wear it as the representative of the older generation of our family. Kane nodded, making notes in his notebook. Do you want to go to the police? Elliot thought about it. What would happen if he went to the police right now? Scandal, public humiliation, photos in the tabloids. His family, his business, his reputation, everything would be ruined. And even if Wendy and her lover were arrested, what would that accomplish? A couple of years in prison for attempted theft that they didn't even manage to carry out. No, he finally replied. Not yet, at least. I have another plan. Kane raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I want you to keep watching them. I need to know their every move, all their contacts, every detail of their plan. And I need information about those guys Pierce mentioned. That could be dangerous, Mr. Norris, if they're planning an armed robbery. According to the records, they won't have any real weapons, but I still need to know who these people are. I need to stay one step ahead of them. And what do you plan to do with that information? Elliot looked at the photo of Wendy laughing at Nolan. 5 years of marriage. 5 years he considered happy. Maybe they were for him. But for her? I want to teach them a lesson, he said slowly. A lesson they'll never forget. Kane studied his face intently, as if trying to understand what lay behind those words. I don't participate in illegal activities, Mr. Norris, and I don't advise you to do so. Nothing illegal, Elliot assured him. Just justice, with our own resources. After meeting with the detective, Elliot didn't go home. Instead, he headed to his office in the financial district. Despite it being a day off, the building wasn't empty. Traders and analysts often worked on Saturdays, especially when something interesting was happening in the markets. But Elliot wasn't going to work. He locked himself in his office, turned off his phone, and opened his laptop. A plan gradually formed in his head. First, he checked his bank accounts, both his personal ones and the joint ones with Wendy. Then he looked at his credit card statements for the last 6 months, analyzing his wife's expenses. In recent months, she had spent almost twice as much as usual, mostly on clothes and restaurants. But there were also some strange payments, renting a storage unit in Brooklyn, booking a hotel room in Jamaica for the dates immediately after his niece's wedding, and purchasing 2 plane tickets to Cancun with a layover in Miami. Elliot carefully recorded all these details, piecing together a timeline of betrayal. It seemed that Wendy and Nolan had been preparing their escape very thoroughly. Perhaps they had been planning it for a long time, just waiting for the right moment. And a wedding at the plaza with $5 million worth of jewelry was the perfect opportunity. The next step was to study Nolan Pierce himself. In the age of social media, it's almost impossible to hide your past, especially if you've tried to build a career in show business. Pierce had a page on several platforms where he promoted his music. Photos from concerts in small clubs, videos of performances, enthusiastic comments from a few fans. A typical mid-level indie musician dreaming of a big break. But behind this facade lay something more interesting. Digging through the archives of local Ohio news, Elliot discovered a 15-year-old article about Nolan Pierce, a rising star on the local music scene who had won a talent contest and received a scholarship to study at a music college in New York. Next to him in the photo was a young Wendy, identified in the caption as his girlfriend and muse. So that was it. They had been together back then, in a small town in Ohio. They must have had big plans. He would become a rock star, she would become a famous designer. But life had other plans. Nolan didn't make it in music, and Wendy didn't become a designer. And now, 15 years later, they've met again. Old love, old dreams, old resentments toward a life that didn't give them what they thought they deserved. And now they've decided to take what's theirs by force. At his expense, Elliot's. At the expense of the man who gave Wendy everything she could have dreamed of: comfort, status, access to New York's high society. Everything except, apparently, the true love and passion she felt for her high school sweetheart. Elliot leaned back in his chair, massaging his temples. Surprisingly, he didn't feel much pain or jealousy. Rather, he was overwhelmed by a sense of disappointment and a kind of cold rage. He had trusted this woman. He had let her into his life, opened his home and his heart to her, and she had seen him as nothing more than a means to an end. And it wasn't even about the money. Money was just a tool, numbers on a screen. Elliot could survive the financial loss. But the betrayal, the cold calculation with which Wendy planned to use his family values, that was unforgivable. He opened his email and wrote a short message to his sister. "Dear Margaret, I hope the wedding preparations are going well. I would like to make a small change to the plans. Grandma's necklace will remain in the safe deposit box until the day of the ceremony. I will bring it myself in the morning and give it to Emily. I think it would be appropriate for the bride to wear family jewelry rather than the wife of one of the guests. Love, Elliot." He knew his sister would not object. She had never been particularly fond of Wendy, considering her a gold digger. It seemed that Margaret's maternal intuition was more accurate than his own assessment of his wife's character. After sending the letter, Elliot moved on to the next item on his agenda. He called the Plaza Hotel security and asked to be connected to the manager. "John Mitchell speaking." "Mr. Mitchell, this is Elliot Norris. My niece, Emily Hayes, is getting married at your hotel in 2 weeks. "Yes, Mr. Norris, we have that wedding on our schedule. How can I help you?" "I would like to increase security at the event. The bride will be wearing family jewelry of considerable value, and I would like to be sure that everything goes smoothly." "Of course, we can provide additional security. Will there be any special requirements?" "Yes, but I would prefer to discuss them in person. When can I come by?" "I'll be in the office until 6 this evening or any time on Monday. I'll be there in an hour if that's okay with you." "I'll be waiting, Mr. Norris." Elliot closed his laptop and stood up from his desk. The plan was beginning to take shape. But before leaving the office, he looked through the photos taken by the detective once more. In one of them, Wendy was kissing Nolan, running her fingers through his long, dark hair. Elliot remembered how she had kissed him the same way when they first started dating, with the same expression of complete devotion, the same passionate intensity. I wonder if she was sincere then, or was it all just a game, a calculation, preparation for future betrayal? Maybe that was her revenge for a life that had prevented her from becoming who she wanted to be. Marry a rich man, gain access to his money and opportunities, and then use it all to reunite with her true love? Elliot shook his head. Whatever Wendy's motives were, she had miscalculated. He wasn't going to be a passive victim in her game. On the contrary, he intended to teach her a lesson she would never forget. With that thought in mind, he left the office and headed to the Plaza Hotel to discuss security details for the upcoming wedding. Details that would be key elements in his own plan to restore justice. A week before his niece's wedding, Elliot was immersed in the details of his plan. Every element required precision and attention to detail, qualities that had made him a successful financier. This time, however, his analytical skills were focused not on the markets or investment strategies, but on creating a flawless counterplay against his own wife. The first and most important step was to replace the jewelry. The sapphire necklace that had belonged to his grandmother had been kept in a bank safe deposit box for many years. Elliot visited it once a year, usually before Christmas, when he took out the jewelry for the traditional family dinner. Wendy had worn it only twice in all their years together. Finding a jeweler capable of creating a high-quality replica proved difficult, not because such specialists did not exist, but because most of them refused to participate in something that could be considered illegal. But in the end, Elliot found a solution through a longtime client, the owner of a jewelry store on Madison Avenue. "You do realize that copying unique jewelry without the permission of the copyright holder can be problematic?" asked Martin Levin, a thin man with a perfectly trimmed gray beard, when Elliot explained what he needed. "This is a family heirloom, Martin. The real necklace will be kept in a bank. I need a copy for my niece's wedding. Brides often prefer lighter versions of antique jewelry for the ceremony." It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough that Levin didn't ask any further questions. After all, Elliot wasn't just a customer. He was someone whose financial advice had helped the jeweler stay in business during the economic crisis 10 years ago. "All right," Levin finally agreed, "but I'll need the original to make an exact copy, and that will take at least a week, maybe longer. We have exactly 7 days, and price is no object." Levin nodded. "I'll take care of it personally." The next step in the plan was to set up a financial trap. This is where Elliot's professional experience came in handy. In his 25 years on Wall Street, he had learned many ways to protect assets, both legal and in the gray area of the law. He began by compiling a list of all the financial instruments Wendy had access to: joint bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios, real estate. Then he methodically devised a plan to block each one. Some things could be done with a simple phone call to the bank, for example, reporting a lost credit card and requesting a new one. Others required more complex maneuvers, including transferring funds to new accounts and changing the beneficiaries of investment funds. But the biggest help in this part of the plan came from Richard Golden, his longtime friend from the FBI. They met at Yale University, where they studied law together. Then their paths diverged. Elliot went into finance while Richard chose public service, but they stayed in touch over the years, sometimes exchanging professional advice. "Are you sure you want to go down this path?" Richard asked when they met at a small restaurant on the Upper East Side, away from prying eyes. "Divorce would be a more traditional solution." "Divorce is exactly what they're hoping for," Elliot replied, stirring his untouched coffee. "More than that, they're counting on it. Standard division of property, alimony, maybe even compensation for emotional distress if Wendy hires an aggressive enough lawyer. In the end, She'll get a few $1 million just legally instead of staging a kidnapping. And you want her to be left with nothing? Elliot looked at his friend. I want her to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't just use people and then throw them away like a piece of trash. And yes, if she's left with no means of support, maybe that will be a good lesson for her. Golden sighed. Okay, what do you need from me? First, an official investigation. After Wendy's kidnapping, I won't go to the police like they expect. Instead, I'll pretend I received a ransom demand and go straight to the FBI, to you. That will give us legal grounds to arrest Nolan Pierce when he makes contact. Are you sure he'll do it? Absolutely. Once they realize the jewels are fake and their access to the money is blocked, they'll have no choice. They'll either give up or try to get the ransom. Knowing Pierce's character, I'm almost certain he'll choose the latter. The wedding day was clear and sunny, perfect weather for a ceremony in the garden of the Plaza Hotel. Elliot and Wendy arrived right on time. She looked gorgeous in a Carolina Herrera ivory dress with a high neckline that showed off her neck, the perfect choice for showcasing the necklace. You look stunning, Elliot said sincerely as he helped her out of the car. Thank you. Wendy smiled, but her eyes betrayed her tension. She was clearly nervous, and it was understandable. Today she was going to betray the man who had just complimented her and run away with $5 million. The necklace was presented to Wendy in front of the entire family, with the traditional words about generational continuity and family values. Elliot watched as his sister Margaret, the only one who knew about the switch, helped fasten the clasp at the back of Wendy's neck. It was flawless acting on both sides. The ceremony went off without a hitch. Emily was a beautiful bride, her groom happy and a little confused, as was to be expected. The families on both sides radiated joy. Only Elliot and Wendy hid their true feelings behind the masks of a happy married couple. The reception began at 6 in the evening in the hotel's main ballroom. According to Kane, the kidnapping was supposed to take place around 8, when most of the guests would be sufficiently relaxed after cocktails but before the main dancing began. At 7:30, Wendy excused herself and headed for the ladies' room. Elliot nodded, pretending to be completely absorbed in conversation with the groom's colleague. But out of the corner of his eye, he watched his wife disappear into the hallway leading to the service areas. At exactly 7:45, there was a crash of breaking dishes from the kitchen, followed by screams. The guests turned toward the noise, and when they looked back into the hall, there were 3 masked men standing there. "Everyone stay where you are," shouted the tallest of them, holding what appeared to be a gun. "This is a robbery." The second man grabbed Wendy, who accidentally happened to be closest to the kitchen door. She screamed, convincingly enough for an unprepared viewer, but Elliot noticed that she wasn't even trying to break free. "Don't move!" the tall one shouted again as several men, including the security guards, lunged toward Wendy. "We only want the jewelry. No one will get hurt if you keep quiet." The third robber ripped the necklace from Wendy's neck with a slightly rougher movement than necessary, leaving a red mark on her skin. Elliot noted this with cold satisfaction. It seemed that Nolan and his friends' acting skills were inferior to their musical talents. "Now we're leaving," announced the tall man, clearly Nolan. Even through the mask, his voice was recognizable. "With the lady, for insurance. Don't try to follow us if you don't want her to get hurt." With that, they disappeared into the kitchen, taking Wendy with them. A few seconds later, tires screeched as their car waited at the service entrance. Panic broke out in the hall. Guests screamed, security rushed to the exit, and someone called the police. Elliot played the role of the shocked husband, demanding that they find his wife and save her at any cost. 10 minutes later, the police arrived and began questioning witnesses. Elliot was one of the first to give a statement, telling them about the necklace and its value, how it all happened, and his suspicions that it was a planned robbery and not an accident. Then, When the commotion had died down a little, he apologized to the family and the police, saying he had an important phone call to make. Stepping aside, he dialed Richard Golden's number. "It happened," he said without preamble. "They took Wendy and the necklace just as we expected." "Have you notified the police?" "Yes, they're here now. But I told them I'm waiting for instructions from the kidnappers and I'm afraid an active investigation could put Wendy's life in danger." "Okay. I'll contact the local office and explain the situation. I'll tell them the FBI is taking control of the case because of a possible extortion attempt. In the meantime, freeze her accounts and wait for a call from Pierce." "Already done." The first message from the kidnappers arrived 2 hours after the robbery. The text, from an unregistered number, read, "She's alive. Wait for instructions on the ransom." Elliot forwarded the message to Golden and activated a special app that the FBI had installed on his phone. It automatically tracked calls and messages, recorded their source, and recorded conversations. He expected Nolan to call the next morning when he realized the necklace was fake, but the call came much earlier, at 3 in the morning. "What the hell, Norris?" Pierce's voice sounded angry and frightened at the same time. "What kind of fake did you slip him? What are you talking about?" Elliot imitated the sleepy and confused voice of a man who had been woken up in the middle of the night. "Who is this? Don't play games with me. You know who this is, and you know what I'm talking about. The necklace is fake." "Who? What? Oh my God, is that you? The kidnappers, where's my wife? What's happened to her?" "Cut the act!" Nolan shouted. "I know you set this up. I know you've been following us, but you've made a mistake, old man. I have your wife, and if you don't pay me $2 million within 24 hours, I'll send her back to you in pieces." "Listen," Elliot's voice was now pleading. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "What fake? This is my grandmother's necklace. It's worth millions." "It's fake. Those stones aren't worth $1,000, and you knew that." "No, that's impossible. There must be some mistake. Maybe you damaged the stones when you ripped the necklace off." Pierce cursed. "Enough. 2 million. Cash. No police, no FBI. I'll contact you tomorrow with instructions on how to transfer the money." The call ended. Elliot immediately contacted Golden. "Did you hear that?" "Yes. The recording is clear. It's extortion. That's enough for an arrest warrant. Can you trace where he called from?" "We're already on it. Preliminary reports indicate the Brooklyn area, but we need the exact location." "What's next?" "He'll call back with instructions. When he does, stall for time. We need at least 3 minutes to pinpoint the signal." The next call from Nolan came at 10 in the morning. This time, he was more reserved, methodically explaining the money transfer scheme, a complicated route with several transfers designed to confuse any potential surveillance. Elliot played the desperate husband, willing to do anything to save his wife, while asking questions and requesting proof that Wendy was alive and well. The conversation lasted almost 5 minutes, more than enough time to pinpoint the location. When the call ended, Elliot immediately contacted Golden. "We have the address," the agent reported. "A motel on the outskirts of Brooklyn. The capture team is already on its way." "I want to be there." "Out of the question. It's dangerous. Rich, I need to see her face. I need to see the moment she realizes she's lost." Golden sighed. "Fine. But you'll stay in the car at a safe distance. That's not up for discussion." The arrest went surprisingly smoothly. The arrest team stormed into the motel room at 11:30 a.m., while Nolan and Wandy were still asleep. Their accomplices were in the next room and were also arrested without resistance. Elliot watched from a car parked across the street as his wife and her lover were led away in handcuffs. Wendy looked confused and frightened. She looked around as if she didn't understand what was happening. Then she saw Elliot sitting in the car with the window open. Their eyes met, and he saw a moment of realization in her eyes, the moment when she understood that her perfect plan had turned into a nightmare. That same evening, while Nolan and his accomplices were in custody and Wendy was giving her statement to the FBI agents, Elliot began the final stage of his plan. He revoked all powers of attorney he had given Wendy, officially removed her as a beneficiary of his will and insurance policies, and closed all joint accounts and credit cards. Then, after consulting with his lawyer, he sent her a short email. "Wendy, I don't think we have anything left to talk about. I know about your plan, I know about Nolan, I know everything. The necklace you stole is a fake. The real one is still in the bank. All financial assets to which you had access have been frozen or transferred to other accounts. I am filing for divorce. Given the circumstances, I assume you will not object to a quick and quiet dissolution of the marriage. My lawyer will contact you as soon as you find your own representative. Elliot." There was no reply. But through Golden he learned that Wendy had been released on bail and had immediately flown to Rio de Janeiro on a ticket she had purchased in advance. Apparently, this was their backup plan in case things fell through, to flee to a country with no extradition treaty with the U.S. Only now she had no real jewelry and no access to Elliot's accounts. Nolan wasn't so lucky. He was charged with extortion, kidnapping, and fraud. Even with no previous convictions and a good lawyer, he was facing at least 5 years in prison. A year later, Elliot sat in the same restaurant on the Upper East Side where he had once discussed his plan with Richard Golden. This time, Margaret was sitting across from him. "How are you feeling?" his sister asked, studying his face with concern. "It's been a year and you still haven't started dating anyone." "I'm fine," Elliot replied, and it was true. "I'm just taking my time. Last time, rushing into things didn't end well. Have you heard anything about her?" Elliot shook his head. "No, not since the divorce was finalized. As far as I know, she's still in Brazil, working as a fitness instructor at some resort hotel." Margaret snorted. "Well, at least she's back to work in her field. I hope it taught her not to build her life on using other people." "Maybe," Elliot shrugged. "Although, to be honest, I don't hate her. More like disappointment and some pity." "Pity? For a woman who tried to rob you and stage her own kidnapping?" "Yes, because her plan was doomed from the start. Not because of my actions, but because of her own short-sightedness. Even if the necklace had been real, even if they had access to my accounts, do you think they could have stayed in hiding for long? Sooner or later they would have been caught." Margaret shook her head. "You've always been too generous. Even now you're trying to find an excuse for her actions." "Not an excuse. Understanding. They're different things." Elliot looked out the window at the passers-by hurrying about their business. A year ago, he had been one of them, confident in his life, his marriage, his future. Now he was wiser and more cautious, but not embittered. "You know what's strange?" he said, turning to his sister. "I'm grateful to her." "Grateful? For what?" "For teaching me an important lesson. About how easy it is to see what we want to see, rather than what is really there. About how important it is to trust, but to verify. And about how sometimes loss can be the beginning of something new." Margaret smiled and covered his hand with hers. "You've always been able to find the silver lining in even the most unpleasant situations, and that's why I'm sure you'll be fine." Elliot nodded. Yes, he would be fine. Life goes on, despite betrayals and disappointments. And who knows, maybe true love awaits him in the future, the kind that is based not on calculation and gain, but on mutual respect and sincerity. And Wendy, well, he hoped she had learned her lesson too. That somewhere out there in Rio de Janeiro, working as a fitness instructor and perhaps still dreaming of easy money and a luxurious life, she sometimes thinks back on her failed adventure and realizes that sometimes the most cunning trap is the one we set for ourselves.